Welcome to Nicki Woo Cozy Stories. I'm your host, Nicki. Tonight's story is a quiet retelling of the Velveteen Rabbit. So settle in and let the story begin. The sky was the color of a wet stone, a heavy, bruised gray that seemed to press the very scent of the earth into the floorboards of the old farm porch. It was the kind of afternoon that most would call unremarkable, a Tuesday or a Wednesday lost to the rhythmic, persistent drumming of a spring rain. But for the small creature tucked away in a hand-woven basket near the screen door, it was the moment the clock of the world began its first true tick. The porch was a cathedral of soft sounds. There was the steady tap, tap of water hitting the tin roof above, the rhythmic creak of a nearby wooden rocker caught in a draft, and the distant muffled lowing of cattle in the lower pasture. Everything felt damp and cool, held in a state of quiet suspension. Inside the basket, a small assembly of handmade toys waited. There was a tumbling of sea colors and textures, each designed to catch a passing eye. They were grand, golden bears with fur as thick as autumn moss, and sleek porcelain-faced dolls that stared out at the rain with their glassy, bored indifference. These were the toys of ambition, bright, bold, and certain of their own perfection. Among them sat a different kind of rabbit. She was a study in shadows and light, a creature of contrast. Beneath a shaggy, wild surface of cream-colored fur lived a hidden coat of deep, midnight black, like wood smoke curling under a morning mist. Her fur was not the stiff, uniform plush of a factory-made thing. It was a soft, unpredictable landscape. In some spots, it coiled into tight, springy curls that caught the dim light, while in others, it hung in loose, silken waves. She looked less like a prize and more like a secret, a being dreamed into existence by someone who understood that the most beautiful things are rarely the tidiest. She sat perfectly still, her head tilted just a fraction to the side, as if she were listening to the heartbeat of the house through the walls. Her eyes were her most striking feature. They were not the blank, plastic beads of her companions, but dark, liquid pearls. There was a thin sliver of white around the edges of those black depths, a detail that gave her an expression of profound, almost human-like understanding. She didn't look at the world with the empty gaze of an object. She looked at it with a steady, quiet bravery, searching the gray horizon for a familiar face she had not yet met. The heavy screen door creaked on its hinges, a slow, metallic groan that announced the arrival of a family of 6. They spilled out onto the porch, their coats smelling of damp wool and the sharp, clean scent of the rain that they had just walked through. Their voices were hushed, falling into the natural lull of the afternoon. They had come looking for something special, perhaps one of the grand golden bears or a doll with a silk dress that shimmered like a dragonfly's wing. The children gathered around the basket, their small, warm hands hovering over the sleek and the shiny. The grander toys seemed to clamor for attention, their polished surfaces catching the meager light. But the shaggy rabbit did not try to outshine them. She didn't need to be the loudest or the brightest. She simply remained in her state of quiet expectation. She sat in her soft, shaggy skin, knowing with a soul-deep certainty that the right heart would eventually hear the specific frequency of her silence. The youngest of the 4 daughters, a 5-year-old with eyes that held the same quiet wonder as the spring afternoon, leaned over the edge of the basket, and as she did, the rabbit seemed to shift, not by muscle or gear, but by the subtle, slow magic that governs the moments when 2 souls recognize one another. A long, cream-colored ear brushed against the child's hand, a soft, accidental invitation. The girl's breath caught. She reached past the golden fur and the silk dresses, her fingers disappearing into the rabbit's impossibly soft coat. It was fur that already seemed to carry a memory of warmth, smelling faintly of a linen blanket that had been dried in the sun in the high summer meadow. As the child lifted her, the rabbit's stitched mouth seemed to carry a secret, luminous, curve, not a grin, but a soft, quiet expression of homecoming. It was the look of a soul that had finally been found. The family stood frozen for a heartbeat, watching the connection take hold. The perfect toys, with their glass eyes and painted smiles, were suddenly forgotten, relegated to the background of the porch. There was only this brave, shaggy rabbit who had looked into the heart of a child and said, without the need of a single word, "I have been waiting for you." The daughter tucked the rabbit firmly under her chin, the cream-colored fur mingling with her own dark curls. As the rain continued its meditative drumming on the roof, the 6 hearts on the porch became 7. The shaggy rabbit was no longer just a collection of midnight thread and cream-colored fluff. She had crossed the first threshold. The long, beautiful journey toward becoming real had begun with a single, brave moment of being seen. Later that day, when the family arrived back home, the shaggy rabbit thought entering their home was like being wrapped in the heavy, comforting weight of a knitted quilt. As the front door clicked shut against the persistent rhythm of the spring rain, the cool gray mist of the porch was replaced by the deep, familiar heart of the house. It was the scent that lived in the wood and the curtains, a rich layered perfume of dried lavender from the garden, the sweet yeasty breath of bread cooling on the counter, and the lingering humming warmth of the wood stove. The youngest of the 4 sisters did not set the shaggy rabbit down. She held her close, her small chin resting right between the rabbit's cream-colored ears, their heartbeats almost finding the same pace. They moved through the house together, passing the boots lined up by the door and the coats hanging like tired shadows in the hall. The rabbit felt the rhythm of the child's footsteps, a soft, skipping beat that traveled through the sawdust into her chest, making her feel as though she were finally moving in the right direction. Upstairs, the nursery was a world of its own. It was a room tucked away safely under the eaves of the roof, where the ceiling slanted low and made every corner feel like a secret meant for keeping. The walls were painted a soft, sun-ripened apricot, a glowing, sophisticated orange that seemed to catch and hold the light, even on the grayest days. It was a room built for 4, filled with the soft chatter of sisters, the rustle of turning pages, and the occasional thump of a stray shoe on the honey-colored floorboards. There were 4 beds, each with its own tumbled pile of blankets, but the youngest girl led the rabbit to the window seat, a nook filled with the velvet pillows that caught the last of the afternoon light. The rabbit looked out at her new world through her dark, pearl-black eyes. It was a place where things were meant to be used and deeply loved. There were shelves of books with softened, rounded corners and wooden toys that had lost their bright paint to years of honest play. In the corner, near the hearth, where the low fire hummed and popped, sat an old friend who had seen many seasons pass. He was the skin horse. He had lived in this nursery since the eldest daughter was a baby, and even then he was considered old. He was made of brown corduroy that had worn bald in great soft patches, showing the white seams beneath like the maps of a long and meaningful life. His tail was mostly gone, and his joints creaked when he moved, but he had a steady, quiet presence that made the rabbit feel suddenly very young and very new. The skin horse watched the shaggy rabbit as she settled into the apricot glow of the pillows. He saw the way her cream fur mingled with the child's dark curls, and how her black pearl eyes reflected the flickering light of the fire with a startling, human-like depth. "You've chosen a good heart," said the skin horse. His voice was low, comfortable, a rumble like a cat purring in the patch of sun. The rabbit felt a soft hum of curiosity in her seams. "Is it always like this?" she asked. "So warm and full of voices?" The skin horse smiled, his worn face wrinkling in a way that felt like a silent hug. "It is a house of many sisters," he said. There was always a hand to hold or a story to hear. But you are the lucky one. You have been brought into their inner circle. That is where the real memories are made. The rabbit looked down at the brownish gold highlights on her legs and the soft wavy curls of her cream-colored coat. But I am just shaggy and small, she whispered. That is exactly why you will last, the Skin Horse replied softly. In this house, we don't care much for things that stay perfect. We care for things that hold the scent of the sun and the weight of a sleepy head. That is how you become part of the family. It's a slow, quiet kind of magic. It happens on rainy afternoons and during the long, dark nights when you're the only one awake to hear the child's dreams. The rabbit didn't quite understand yet, but as the daughter tucked her under the covers of the smallest bed, she felt a sense of belonging that went deeper than her stitching. She breathed in the scent of the child's sweater. It smelled like a blanket that spent all day drying on a line in the backyard, soaking up the light of the world. Outside, the wind brushed against the roof, but inside, the apricot nursery was a fortress of warmth. The rabbit closed her eyes, listening to the soft, rhythmic breathing of the four sisters, and for the first time, she felt her sawdust heart settle into the quiet, steady pulse of the home. The nursery was a room that seemed to hold on to the sun long after it had dipped behind the jagged line of the western pines. The walls were painted a soft, sun-ripened apricot, a color that lived somewhere between the glow of a morning peach and the dusty amber of a summer twilight. It was a hue that made the four sisters look as if they were always playing in the last, best light on an afternoon, their shadows long and soft against the honey-colored floorboards. In this apricot-colored sanctuary, time didn't move in hours. It moved in the shifting weight of 4 different lives. While the youngest daughter had been the first one to pull the rabbit from the basket, the shaggy, cream-colored creature quickly realized that her heart was as vast as the landscape, large enough to hold them all. She became the golden thread of the nursery. During the bright, chaotic mornings, she was a quiet companion to the eldest, sitting patiently on a stack of leather-bound books as the girl practiced her lessons. The rabbit's dark, pearl eyes seemed to follow the flow of every poem, offering a silent, steady encouragement that only sister could give. By the golden light of midday, she was often tucked under the arms of the middle sisters, participating in elaborate tea parties, where the tea was only imagination, and the conversation was full of shared secrets and sudden, bright laughter. The rabbit's shagginess became a living record of the entire family. Her cream fur, once so springy and wild, began to soften and settle, taking on a unique map of their communal love. There was a flattened patch on her side where the second sister liked to rest her cheek while she was dreaming. There were stray, colorful threads caught in her paws from the eldest embroidery project, and her scent, that deep, comforting smell of a sun-dried blanket, became the very smell of the nursery itself, a scent that told the girls they were home. She was no longer just a toy. She was a sister in spirit. She understood the specific rhythm of each girl's breath. She knew who needed a silken ear to hold during the sudden thunderstorms, and who needed to see her knowing expression when a secret was just too big to keep. She chose them, one by one, night after night, rotating through the 4 tumbled beds as if she were a guardian making her rounds. "You're spreading yourself thin," the Skin Horse remarked one evening, his voice a low wooden creak from the corner near the hearth. "Your seams are pulling and your brownish gold highlights are fading where they've been petted too much by so many hands." The rabbit looked at the 4 sleeping forms, their dark curls spilled across their pillows like ink. She felt loose in her joints, but was comfortable. Heavy kind of loose, the kind that comes from being exactly where you're meant to be. "I don't feel thin," the rabbit whispered, her voice as soft as the settling embers in the grate. "I feel woven in. If I were only for one, I would be a prize, but because I am for all of them, I am becoming real." "It is a heavy magic to love 4 at once," the skin horse said, his worn corduroy face softening in the firelight. "It means your journey to be real will be swifter, but it will leave more marks." The rabbit didn't mind the marks. She welcomed them. But as the seasons turned, the vibrant energy of the apricot room began to slow. A hush fell over the house, not like a sudden frost, but like a long, quiet winter afternoon. The youngest sister grew still, her laughter replaced by the rhythmic, shallow sound of a breath that struggled to find its way. The house grew quiet. The eldest sisters moved on tiptoe, their voices muffled by the heavy rugs and the weight of the shared worry. The smell of the nursery changed. The lavender and cocoa were replaced with the sharp, clean scent of eucalyptus and the steam of healing teas. The rabbit didn't choose a bed anymore. She stayed on the one where she was needed the most. While the grown-ups came and went with cool cloths, the rabbit remained the steady, silent anchor for all four girls. The older sisters would come to the bedside, reaching out to touch the rabbit's shaggy head for their own comfort, drawing strength from her stillness before they checked on their littlest sister. The rabbit felt the heart of the fever, but she didn't flinch. She used her dark pearl eyes to watch over the room, holding the space for all of them. She was the one who stayed awake when the sisters finally drifted into a fitful sleep, her presence a fierce, quiet vow of loyalty. In the long, quiet hours, she realized that being real meant standing watch over the entire flock. The apricot walls drooped dark as the candles flickered low, but the rabbit stayed. She felt the weight of the house resting on her sawdust shoulders, and she held it with a brave, shaggy grace. The middle of the night in the apricot nursery was not dark. It was a deep velvet indigo. The shadows of the pine trees outside moved slowly across the walls, like the gentle waving of a hand in a dream. In the smallest bed, the youngest sister slept, her breath finally finding a steady, easy rhythm. The fever had broken, leaving the room feeling light and clear, like the air after a sudden summer storm. The rabbit remained at the center of the vigil. She sat on the pillow, her shaggy cream fur slightly damp from a week of cool cloths and long, tearful hugs. She wasn't alone in the shadows. One by one, the older sisters appeared, drawn by the quiet, magnetic pull of the room. First the eldest, her nightgown trailing on the floorboards like a soft cloud. She didn't say a word. She simply knelt by the bed and rested her hand on the rabbit's head. She drew a deep breath, and the rabbit felt the girl's lingering worry dissipate into the quiet air. Then came the middle sisters, huddled together for warmth. They didn't check the thermometer or the medicine bottles. They checked the rabbit. They straightened her long silken ears and smoothed the brownish gold highlights on her legs. "She stayed awake the whole time," the second sister whispered, her voice a tiny thread of silence. "She's the bravest of us all," the third replied. In that midnight watch, the rabbit realized that she wasn't just a toy being held. She was a bridge. She had absorbed the fear of the last week into her sawdust and thread, leaving only love behind. But as the first gray light of the morning began to creep over the windowsill, a new kind of quiet entered the room. The door creaked open, and the parents stood there. They looked at the youngest sister, then at the three older ones huddled on the floor, and finally, their gaze fell on the rabbit. The mother stepped forward and touched the rabbit's fur. It was matted and worn, thinned by the friction of too much love and the salt of too many tears. "She has done so much," the mother whispered, her voice thick with a gentle, protective warmth. "But she is so very tired. Her seams are weary, and she needs the fresh air of the spring and the kiss of the garden to make her new again." The rabbit felt the mother's warm hands lift her. For a moment, a tiny shiver of not knowing ran through her stitching. But as she was carried toward the window, she saw the skin horse watching from the shadows of the hearth. He gave a slow, tiny nod, a gesture of profound respect. "Do not be afraid of the garden," his voice seemed to echo in the stillness. "This is how the magic finds its way home." The mother didn't take her to a dark corner or a forgotten bin. She took her to the back porch, where the Easter lilies were just beginning to show their white trumpets. She placed the rabbit in a beautiful silk-lined wicker basket, tucked beneath the shelter of the eaves where the morning sun would hit first. "Sleep now, sweet girl," the mother whispered, kissing the top of the rabbit's head. "The sun will find you here." As the door clicked shut, the rabbit sat alone in the basket. The air was cool and smelled of damp moss and the coming of spring. She looked up at the fading stars, her black pearl eyes reflecting the vast mystery of the night. She was separated from the apricot walls, but she didn't feel lost. She felt like a seed planted in the dark, waiting for the miracle. She knew she would leave something behind, a knowing that would settle into the nursery like a golden dust. Long after she was gone, the sisters would walk into the room and smell the scent of the sun-dried blanket, or find a single, shimmering cream-colored thread on her pillow. And they would smile, knowing that their shaggy guardian hadn't left them. She had simply become part of the air they breathed. The morning arrived with a slow, honeyed glow that crept over the edge of the world like a secret being shared. In her silk-lined wicker basket, the rabbit watched as the silver frost on the Easter lilies began to weep into the dark soil, turning into liquid diamonds under the first touch of the sun. The air on the back porch was crisp, tasting of cold mountain water and the sweet green promise of new clover waking up beneath the dew. She sat perfectly still, her shaggy cream-colored fur catching the light, until she looked less like a toy and more like a fallen cloud that had decided to rest among the flower pots. For the first time in many seasons, she was not held by a warm hand or tucked into an apricot-colored corner. She was part of the wide, breathing world, and the silence of the garden felt as vast as the sea. From the edge of the woods, where the pines stood tall and silent, like ancient sentinels, something moved. At first, it was just a shiver in the tall grass, a ripple of brownish gold that looked remarkably like the highlights on the rabbit's own legs. Then, one by one, they appeared. The wild rabbits. They were sleek and quick, their ears twitching like autumn leaves in a draft. They moved with a liquid grace that the rabbit had only ever imagined in her sawdust heart. They hopped closer to the porch, their noses wrinkling as they caught the scent of the garden. They stopped at the edge of the wicker basket, their dark, liquid eyes meeting the rabbit's pearl-black ones. A small, sandy-colored rabbit hopped right up to the edge of the basket. He looked at her, shaggy, cream-colored. Her coat was still, velvet ears with a curious tilt of his head. "Why don't you get up and play with us?" he asked. His voice was like the rustle of dry grass in a summer field. The rabbit felt a strange, heavy tug in her seams. I cannot," she whispered. Her voice carried the soft, muffled weight of the nursery. "My legs are stiff with thread, and my heart is made of sawdust. I am a creature of the hearth, not the field." The wild rabbit tilted his head, his whiskers dancing in the morning light. He hopped a little closer, sniffing around the air, around her basket. "You smell strange," he said, not unkindly. "You smell of sun-dried blankets and the sweet lingering heat of a wood stove. You smell like a promise." The rabbit looked down at her paws. They were worn and stained with faint green of the meadow from the summer before, but they were still just stitched-together cloth. "I am a promise," she said softly. "I promised to stay awake when the sisters slept. I promised to be the anchor when the fever was high. I have kept my word." The wild rabbits began to dance around the basket, a joyous, blurring circle of life. They leapt over one another, their hind legs powerful and free, their wild tails flashing like signals in the morning light. The shaggy rabbit watched them with a longing so deep it felt as if her stitches might burst. "Is it true," she asked, her pearl-black eyes wide and shimmering, "that a heart made of sawdust can learn to beat? That a coat made of thread can feel the dew?" The sandy rabbit paused his dance and looked at her with a knowing, ancient gaze. "Sawdust is just wood that hasn't learned to move yet," he said. "And thread is just a vine that forgot how to grow. If you have been loved until you are real, the thread and the wood are just the shell. The life is already inside of you, little sister. You just have to decide to let it out." The rabbit looked at the heavy wooden door of the house. She thought of the 4 sisters waking up in the apricot room, and she realized that she was caught between 2 worlds, the warmth of the home that she had guarded, and the wild, green freedom that was calling her name. She sat in the quiet of the morning, the scent of the lilies rising up to meet her, feeling the first true spark of a choice beginning to glow deep within her chest. The sun had finally cleared the tops of the pines, turning the backyard into a sea of liquid gold. The shaggy rabbit sat on the edge of her wicker basket, her pearl-black eyes fixed on the wild, sandy rabbit who was waiting for her in the grass. Behind her, the heavy wooden door of the house remained shut, but she could feel the presence of the 4 sisters through the glass, a warm, steady hum of affection that had followed her since the first day on the porch. She thought of the eldest quiet lessons, the middle sister's secret tea parties, and the youngest fever grip. She realized then that they weren't just loving her. They were filling her up, stitch by stitch, with a life that was too big for a basket. "The wind is waiting," the sandy rabbit called out, his ears twitching with the rhythm of the morning. "The clover is sweet and the world is wide. Will you stay in the silk, or will you come to the earth?" The rabbit felt a sudden, fierce surge of courage in her sawdust chest. It was a gift from the sisters, a courage she had learned while watching them grow. She knew that if she stayed, she would eventually become just a memory in a box. But if she leaped, she could become the story they told for the rest of their lives. She didn't wait for the door to open. She didn't wait for a sign. The single, brave bound, she launched herself from the edge of the wicker basket. For a heartbeat, she was suspended in the air, a creature of cream-colored thread and brownish-gold highlights framed against the white Easter lilies. And in that suspended moment, the slow magic finally reached its crescendo. As her paws touched the cool, dew-drenched grass, the world didn't explode with light. It simply softened. The stiff, stitched seams of her legs dissolved into the powerful muscle and bone. The sawdust in her chest gave a sudden, joyous thump as it transformed into a beating heart. Her fur, still shaggy, still cream and black, still carrying the faint scent of the apricot room, became velvet to the touch, warm and alive. She didn't fall. She landed. The sensation was overwhelming. For the first time, she felt the dampness of the earth between her toes. She felt the whiskers on her face twitching with the vibration of a passing bee. She felt the weight of her own ears, no longer silken ribbons, but living sensors that caught the whispers of the pines. The sandy rabbit leapt into the air with a celebratory kick. "Welcome home, little sister." The rabbit took her first real breath. It tasted of pine needles and damp moss, and it went all the way down to her very toes. She looked back at the porch. The wicker basket looked small and empty now, a shell left behind by a creature that had outgrown it. She wasn't a toy anymore. She was a real rabbit. But as she stood there in the tall grass, she felt a lingering warmth on her back, the phantom touch of 4 pairs of hands. She knew she wasn't leaving them behind. She was simply taking their love into the wild, where it could run as far and as fast as she did. With a playful flick of her tail, she turned towards the woods. She wasn't heavy or weary anymore. She was light. She was fast. And for the second time in her life, she was exactly where she was meant to be. The grass was not just green. It was 1,000 different shades of emerald and moss and lime, each blade a cool silken ribbon against her new velvet paws. As the rabbit took her first tentative hop into the world beyond the porch, she felt a sensation so sharp and sweet that it nearly took her breath away. It was a feeling of the earth, the ancient, steady pulse of the soil that had been waiting for her to join the dance. She moved with a lightness she had never known. In the nursery, her movements had been dictated by the hands that carried her, but now the strength came from within her. Her hind legs, once stiff and stuffed with sawdust, were now powerful coils of muscle that propelled her forward in long, joyous arcs. Each time she landed, she felt the spring of the turf, a welcoming push that invited her to go further, faster, and deeper into the wild. The sandy rabbit was a golden blur ahead of her, leading the way toward the edges of the pines. "Come on," he called, his voice a whisper in the wind. "The woods are waking up, and there's so much to see." The rabbit didn't need to be told twice. She let her ears lay back against her shaggy cream coat, feeling the air rush past her whiskers. It was a sensory symphony. She could hear the high-pitched hum of the insects in the clover, the resonant creak of the oak trees stretching into the morning sun, and the distant, rhythmic drumming of a woodpecker. Everything was alive, and for the first time, so was she. She reached the shadow of the pines, where the air was cooler and smelled intensely of resin and damp needles. The ground here was soft and springy, covered in a carpet of rust-colored needles that muffled their footsteps. The rabbit slowed to a trot, her nose twitching as she took in the new world. She saw the way the light filtered through the canopy, creating dancing patterns of gold on the forest floor, patterns that reminded her of the shadows of the candle flame and of the apricot room. She realized that the forest was just another kind of nursery. The trees were the walls, and the sky was the ceiling, and the wind was the voice that told her stories. "Is it always this beautiful?" she asked, pausing by a cluster of wild ferns that uncurled like green lace. The sandy rabbit stopped and looked at her, his eyes dark but bright. "It is what you make of it," he said, "but for those of us who've been loved into being, it's a little brighter. We see the magic that the others miss." The rabbit sat back on her haunches, her shaggy fur blending into the dappled light. She felt the warmth of the sun on her back, but she also felt a different kind of warmth, the memory of the four sisters. Even as she explored the wild, she carried the apricot room with her. Every hop was a tribute to the youngest's recovery. Every twitch of her ears was a salute to the eldest's poems. She wasn't just a rabbit running in the woods. She was a bridge between the hearth and the heart of the wild. She spent the morning learning the language of the forest, the way the shadows told the time, the way the dampness of the air predicted the rain, and the way the other creatures moved with a quiet, respectful grace. As the sun reached its zenith, she found herself at the edge of a clear, bubbling brook. She leaned down to drink, and for the first time, she saw her reflection in the moving water. She saw the cream and black fur, the shaggy curls, and the pearl-black eyes that held the still glimmer of a human knowing. She looked real. She felt real. And as she turned back to follow the sandy rabbit into the deeper woods, she knew that this was only the beginning of her grand adventure. The morning of Easter Sunday arrived with a clarity that felt like a bell ringing across the valley. In the woods, the shaggy rabbit felt a shift in the air, a pull that was stronger than the scent of clover or the call of the wild. It was the pull of the apricot room, a gentle tugging at her new beating heart that told her it was time to go back to the edge of the world she once knew. She moved through the underbrush with the grace of a shadow, her cream and black fur dappled by the shifting light of the canopy. And as she reached the line where the pines met the manicured grass of the backyard, she slowed. She sat back on her haunches, hidden behind a cluster of blooming forsythia, and watched. The back door of the house swung open, and the sound of laughter spilled out, the bright, chaotic music of the four sisters. They were dressed in their Sunday best, a flurry of floral prints and ribbons, each carrying a wicker basket that matched the one that the rabbit had left behind. The youngest was in the lead, her cheeks flushed with health, her eyes bright as she scanned the grass for hidden treasures. The older three followed close behind, their voices overlapping as they called out to one another, pointing out the bright splashes of color hidden beneath the lilies and the ferns. The rabbit watched them with her dark, knowing eyes. She saw the way they moved through the garden, the same garden that had once seemed like a distant, frightening world. She felt a profound sense of peace. The knowing that she had left in the nursery was working. They were happy. They were whole. But as the youngest sister approached the forsythia bush, she stopped. She looked directly at the spot where the rabbit was hidden. For a long, breathless moment, the world went quiet. The child's eyes searched the shadows, and then, slowly, a soft smile spread across her face. She didn't run forward. She didn't call her sisters over. She simply reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, dried sprig of lavender, the scent of the nursery. She placed it on a flat stone at the edge of the woods and whispered something that the wind carried straight to the rabbit's ears. "I see you, Shaggy. I know you're real." The older sisters caught up, and for a second, they all stood together at the boundary of the wild. They looked at the empty wicker basket on the porch, and then at the deep green of the woods. There was no sadness in their gaze, only a quiet, collective understanding. They weren't looking for a toy they had lost. They were acknowledging a friend who had graduated. In that moment, the rabbit felt the final thread of possession snap. The sisters weren't holding on anymore. They were letting her go. Not because they had forgotten her, but because they loved her enough to let her belong to the wind. The youngest sister turned back to the egg hunt, her laughter ringing out once more, but the rabbit stayed for a moment longer. She looked at the sprig of lavender on the stone, a gift of peace, a sign that the bridge between the hearth and the wild would always remain open. With a final, lingering look at the apricot walls through the window, the rabbit turned and leaped back into the deep shadows of the pines. She wasn't a guardian anymore. She was a legend. And as she disappeared into the green, she knew that whenever the sisters smelled sun-dried blankets or felt a sudden warmth in the air, they would know she was running, free and real, just beyond the trees. The sun has finally dipped below the line of the western pines, leaving behind a sky of color and sun-ripened apricot. It is the same glow that lives in the nursery walls, as if the house and the horizon are sharing a single, quiet thought. Deep in the woods, tucked beneath the roots of an ancient, moss-covered oak, the shaggy rabbit finds a hollow that smells of damp earth and old, silvered wood. But she doesn't close her eyes just yet. She sits very still, her cream and black fur silvered by the first rising of the moon. She feels the slow magic stretching out from her chest like a golden thread, reaching through the tall grass over the porch and under the heavy oak door of the cottage. She realizes now that being real means she no longer is bound by stitches or space. She doesn't have to be held to be there. In the apricot room, the youngest sister stirs in her sleep. She feels a sudden cool breeze rustle the curtains, a breeze that carries the scent of pine needles and wild clover. It's the breath of the forest, brushing against her cheek like a silken ear. On the edge of the eldest sister's bed, there's a soft, familiar weight, a phantom warmth that settles into the blankets and stays there until the sun rises. The rabbit has become the guardian of the gate. Every night as the grandfather clock in the hallway ticks its slow, steady beat, the rabbit makes her rounds. She leaps through the meadow, her powerful legs finding the rhythm of the earth. She sits at the very edge of the garden, watching the glowing windows of the home she once guarded. She sees the shadows of the four sisters as they settle into their pillows, and she sends them a knowing, a pulse of pure, shaggy love that travels through the night air and settles in their hair like starlight. The skin horse was right. Once you're real, it can never be lost. You become the reason the house feels safe. You become the reason the sisters will grow up to be brave. and the reason they will always believe that the world is a kind and magical place. The rabbit closes her pearl-black eyes. She feels the rhythmic pulse of the forest beneath her paws and the distant, familiar heartbeat of the four sisters in the room above. The two worlds are one. The hearth and the wild are the same. The wind whispers through the needles. The wood stove in the cottage pops one last contented time, and the magic hums a final sleepy song. Everything is exactly where it belongs. The shaggy guardian is home. The sisters are safe. And the love is real. And now, the cottage grows quiet once more. The apricot nursery, once filled with the bright energy of the four sisters, settles into a gentle, silvered stillness. The firelight softens against the walls, and the long corridors of the home rest beneath the quiet hush of the evening. Outside, the night has come softly over the pines. The wind moves through the needles in a low, steady whisper, and the garden lies still beneath the moonlight, as though it too remembers the velvet friend who once played among the lilies. The nursery shelf is empty now, but the air is full. The long wait for real is over. The wicker basket has been left behind, and the promise of a love that never leaves has been kept. Somewhere, beyond the garden walls, the forest remains as it always has, deep, watchful, and wild. But its shadows no longer feel dark. They simply feel like home. And here, within the safety of the hearth, the four sisters rest at last, watched over by a guardian who's no longer bound by stitches, but by the very spirit of the house itself. The long nights of waiting have passed. The knowing has been shared, and all that was once fragile has settled into something steady and sure. The candles burn low, the air grows still, and the whole world drifts gently toward rest. So now, let the story grow quiet and fade into the night. Sleep now. You are safe. You are loved. You have been listening to Nicki Woo Cozy Stories, written and created by Coco Woodard. May your dreams be gentle and your sleep be deep.